All right. Good midday, everyone in Central Europe to our IIP talk on what future for Kosovo, reflections on the election results. I'm very glad that we have been able to have this discussion shortly after the elections, which took place on Sunday. And even though it's not yet 100% counted, I think there are still some diaspora voters incoming. But we can see already that it seems that Vjosa Albin Kurti's party won in a landslide. We are going to discuss what this means for Kosovo, what does it mean for the region, what will the new government look like, what will be the big challenges they are facing, but also what it means for reconciliation and dialogue with Serbia. I'm very, very happy to welcome from Pristina DONIKA EMINI. Glad to see you. And DONIKA is the executive director of CiviKos platform, and she's a political analyst. And I know that she has been very busy in the last days and weeks discussing all what is going to come for Kosovo, the elections, what will be the results, what will be the outcome. So I'm very happy that she took her time to discuss with us today. So welcome, DONIKA.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I would also like to welcome Hannes SWOBODA. He's the president of the International Institute for Peace. And he also used to be in the European Parliament for more than 18 years, but he also has a very, very long history in the region. He used to work there a lot, so I'm very happy, Hannes, to have you here as well today.
Happy as well.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie FENKART, and I'm director at the International Institute for Peace, and I will try to moderate for the next 45 minutes, an hour. And I would also like to welcome all our participants and encourage you to post questions to DONIKA or to Hannes in the Q&A or in the chat function you see below. But first, before we are going to start, I would like to ask you, DONIKA, very, very briefly to present yourself. What have you been working in the last years? What is your special focus? Just very brief to give us a little bit about your work and your focus, please.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yes, I mean, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to organize the discussion on the independence anniversary, but also just after the elections in Kosovo, which have been turned the events around. We will talk about it later. Sure, I mean, I'm DONIKA EMINI. I'm currently leading an NGO, a platform of NGOs in Kosovo, bringing together 270 civil society organizations covering the entire territory of Kosovo. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Westminster, and I'm working on EU stabilitocracy and how the EU has, and focusing on the case of Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. Of course, I'm a member of BPAG. You probably have heard a lot about this platform of experts and the work that they have done in the past decade. And of course, I'm part of your family. You know, the initiative, the Balkans Vision 2030, and all the events and papers we have written together and study visits, which I miss these days a lot. So I've been living in Kosovo in the past year nonstop because of the pandemic. It has been an eventful year in which we have changed 3 governments, and we are looking forward to forming the next one. So I'm a database of political crisis, constitutional, institutional crisis, and I'm happy to discuss with you in the upcoming hour.
Thank you very much, DONIKA. Maybe Hannes, also maybe you can also give us a little bit a view on what you have been doing in the recent years, and maybe also a little bit like why you have this experience in the region, just very briefly.
Yes, all from beginning already when I was politician in Vienna, I was interested in the neighborhood southeast of Vienna and the Balkans, because we have many people from all the countries here in Vienna. But then in European Parliament, I was vice president of the delegation of the European Parliament to Southeastern Europe. That means to all the countries of Southeastern Europe, and therefore also the Kosovo issue was very high on the agenda. I remember very well when Kosovo was still part of Yugoslavia, Serbia, when I visited Kosovo some months after I came into European Parliament with a small delegation. And our first date was with Mr. Rugova, who was later president, and he was one of the leaders of the Albanian community in Kosovo. And then he said, please first go to a house in a near village where they brought into the house, into the family, a young man who died, and the prisoners, he came from prison. The prison guard said he committed suicide, and the family, of course, had the impression that he was killed. So 3 of us went there into this house, and we saw the man on the table. We, of course, could not, we were not doctors, could not confirm if he was killed or if he committed suicide. But when we saw the people next day at the funeral, we saw into the faces of the young people who followed the coffin and to the funeral, and we saw the strong determination to fight for independence. And when we met the Serb official there in the country, we saw their determination to continue the suppression of the people. So if many people speak about was it right or wrong to give independence to Kosovo, I say all these people haven't been there and haven't seen how Kosovo was in the grip of security and other forces of Serbia. And that does not mean that I don't like the Serbs. I'm have equal distance to Kosovo Albanians and Serbs, also to the Serb community in Kosovo, if they are ready to accept that they live in a different state than they lived before. But it's just to mention why I am also emotionally interested in the region and in the country, and I hope that a dialogue can be started again between Serbia and Kosovo, a useful dialogue. But DONIKA will tell us if Mr. Kurti, who did not speak much about that, will be ready or forced or pushed into such a dialogue.
Thank you very much, Hannes. Both of you mentioned that today is also the Independence Day of Kosovo, and I think we will go back to that probably a little bit later on. But let's start, of course, with DONIKA and what happened on Sunday. I mean, you already mentioned snap elections took place, and Vjosa, which means self-determination in English, won by a landslide, actually leaving the old parties quite behind. I mean, it's around 48% what I hear for now, which gives them around 53 to 55 seats out of 120 seats in the Kosovo parliament. But compared to the PDK and the LDK, they left them quite behind with respectively 13 and 17%. So that is really a landslide victory for Albin Kurti and his party. It is also the highest percentage by which a party won an election in Kosovo so far. So this is also maybe something quite remarkable. DONIKA, if you could probably just give us a little bit on what led to the snap elections, a little bit of the story behind it, but also is it really why did people who actually voted for Vjosa especially, like who are the people voting for them, considering also the turnout, which is not so high, but it never really used to be quite high in Kosovo. But is it really this, would you say it is this asking for change? Would you say that this is the main factor? And please just analyze what has been going on so far, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. I mean, it was a very emotional flashback after listening to Hannes, and I was 10 years old during the war in Kosovo, and I still, regardless of my young age, I vividly remember moments that will stay with me forever. And then this is probably something that we can sort out with dialogue, and not just in between Kosovo and Serbia, but also Bosnia and Croatia. And this is something that we have been kind of pushing forward, not just with the help of the EU, but also with the help of critical masses still existing in these countries. Yes, I mean, it was an eventful year, as I said. Snap elections came as a result of the Constitutional Court declaring the Hoti government as illegitimate due to the fact that the one MP who voted for the government, which was the actual vote that established the Hoti government, the 61 vote that Hoti needed, was supposed to be in jail instead of the parliament to be raising hands and deciding on the future of the country. So we went to snap elections, which in Kosovo are quite often. I mean, no government has made it to the end, but elections usually took place every 2 or 3 years, and these elections took place 1.5 years after the October elections of 2019, in which they were considered as a marking a major turn on how the voters actually think and what the voters actually want from the political parties. They want change, they want hope, they want parties that actually talk about the future instead of the past. They want political parties which are seeking to dismantle state capture, fight corruption, create jobs and opportunities, and create a conducive and a healthy environment for us to live. If you look at the snap elections and the Vedvendosje win, I mean, Hannes can definitely help me in this regard, but no grassroots, no social movement made it from that point to becoming the biggest political force in Yugoslavia. It's only Vedvendosje that actually started as a grassroots social movement and became the main political force, winning the elections. And if you look at the numbers, Albin Kurti is challenging Ibrahim Rugova, who was mentioned by Hannes here as the spiritual, but also the father of the country, and the leader that we never thought would be challenged in terms of support gaining from the citizens. So Kurti has in a plural fragmented system of Kosovo, in which 28 parties have been running in the last elections, he won almost 50% of the support, meaning that it's a lot of political weight and responsibility for him after the elections. If you look at who voted for Kurti and why people voted for Kurti, there are 3 elements. The first element is the opposition, the resilience, and the sustainability of the party. In Kosovo, we always thought that we need new parties. We had those parties, usually elitist parties, which were created sporadically, but the moment they failed to pass the 5% benchmark to enter the parliament, they dissolved immediately. They didn't sustain. They didn't stay here to work and run again in the next elections. They just merged with other parties and dissolved immediately. For Vedvendosje, this wasn't the case. They grew in the opposition. Growing in the opposition is gains a lot of support, especially when in Kosovo, having 20 years being ruled by a corrupt political elite. So one of the elements is the fact that he stayed, he sustained, and he was resilient. So when for the first time Vedvendosje ran in the 2010 elections, they made it to the parliament immediately. So they created a very, very strong electorate, gained a lot of support before becoming a political party while being a social movement. And when they transformed, they made it to the parliament immediately. The second element is, of course, the hope. I mean, if you look at, how strategically Kurti has partnered with Vjosa Osmani, who both are considered progressive politicians, new generation politicians who have not been part of any establishment. We hardly count the 50 days of Kurti because they were during the pandemic, and of course it was not a lot to be seen, because in the time span of 50 days, all you can learn is how to navigate in the government building. You cannot really implement any of the reforms or objectives set during the elections campaign. But it was considered to be having a progressive agenda and reformist agenda, because many processes such as vetting in the judicial system had already started, and Kurti had an approach of cleaning the system from the old corrupt political parties. And then the third one, of course, is the anger. and the dissatisfaction that has been accumulated from March 2020. I mean, if you look at how the approval rates for Kurti and also his popularity, it started in April it started to double in April, and that was immediately after he was overthrown, and the way that he was overthrown by the old ruling elite in an orchestrated activity led by President Thaci, who now is in The Hague, in a way made people angry because we have been going through the most uncertain period of time, dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, which was, challenging even the most developed countries, and let alone Kosovo, underdeveloped, with a healthcare system that has been prone to corruption in the past 20 years. So all of this, dissatisfaction has been accumulated, growing Kurti even more, in even the support for Kurti even more. So in a way, people, and even Kurti called it a referendum. And it wasn't because of the 51%. It was because you had only two options: the old ruling elite and the new one, that would push the country forward. If you look at who voted for Kurti, it's very interesting because it's a young age. This is and then if you look at the other parties which have been dismantled, I mean, we never thought that PDK and LDK would perform in such a bad way. I mean, we knew that they were, of course, the support for them was decreasing, but they have been very established parties. In the past 20 years, they have captured the state through clientelism, and this is very hard to actually dismantle. But now the voter is thinking independently, which is a good sign. The voter has changed. The awareness of the voter in Kosovo is different. It's changed. They have different demands. In Kosovo, people are not voting for the past anymore. They are voting for the future. They are not voting for Rugova because, people born after 2000, unfortunately, hardly understand this, the Rugova period, and less emotionally attached to it, not like me, for instance, who after hearing Hannes became immediately emotional. And of course, you cannot, gain and motivate voters with KLA, because again, it's in the past. And by the way that even Hashim Thaci and his partners have used KLA in the past 20 years to basically maximize their own individual benefits, it has been raising a lot of anger among citizens. It's like you're touching the most glorifying part of our history, and by even supporting special court, by even voting special court, or by not creating conducive environment to deal with the past here, and to create a judicial system that is sustainable enough and independent enough to be dealing with such issues without having to create one that is operating outside of Kosovo. So it is all of these elements that made Kurti who he is today. He, of course, in his political campaign, focused a lot on internal issues. I mean, we are dealing with multi-frontal crisis, it's a socioeconomic crisis. I mean, this is the biggest challenge that Kurti will have, recovering economy after the COVID-19 pandemic. Then, of course, the political, institutional, constitutional crisis, because if you look at how Kosovo has been, at least from 2014, going from one political crisis to another, it speaks volumes about the fragmentation and polarization of the political elite in Kosovo. So it's a long way ahead for Kurti to live up to the expectations. People are expecting a lot, but also being realistic. In a way, they are kind of aware that Kurti might not be able to deliver overnight or even during one mandate, but at least he will be less harmful, according to the citizens, than the old ruling elite. So it's in a way, to wrap it up, people are giving the last chance to Kosovo, and by giving the last chance to a political elite that hasn't been part of any establishment in the past 20 years.
Thank you very much, Donika. I think it's very important also to see who voted for Kurti. It was especially very young people, and we all know that Kosovo has a very young population. You also mentioned several challenges already. I mean, you mentioned the poor economy, corruption, big unemployment, but then of course there's still also the COVID pandemic, but that this hope for change is still there, and especially also the dissatisfaction with the regime before. or at least the government before. Hannes, maybe more from a European Union point of view. We know there are several issues also which are of interest for Kosovo concerning the European Union path, and also especially when it comes, for example, the big problem with the visa liberalization process, which has not yet been fulfilled. And then again, of course, there are still 5 European Union members who are not accepting Kosovo as an independent state until today. What would you say from a European Union point of view? What does this mean? This election now between Vjosa of Albin Kurti, like a social movement now becoming the biggest party, also by indicating this hope for change, and also maybe when we see that change happened also in the Balkan region. I mean, we saw in Montenegro that their government changed. We saw it in North Macedonia. So maybe a little bit on the European Union, like what are the hopes now, and what should be delivered also by Kosovo. And we know it was mentioned that Albin Kurti did not really talk a lot about the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue in his campaign. So this seems that it's not going to be a big focus, but we all know for the European Union it is. So, Hannes, please.
Yes. Well, it was American writer Tennessee Williams who once said, the past is never over, it is not even past. So the past always will be here, as DONIKA mentioned, but I fully agree with DONIKA. One should look now to the future and to the issues which have to be solved now. As we see in Austria or in many other European countries, even things from the Second World War and even earlier from the First World War still come up again and again. But I think it is good to give the younger generation some ideas about the future and to do that kind of job. And I think the European Union made a mistake when they always looked at Kosovo only in relation, or mainly in relation to the Serb issue, or in view of what could be done in the relationship between Kosovo and Serbia. People live there, and people want to have solutions for their job, for their problems, like jobs. I even said to Thaci and to all these people I met in many years, yes, you will have independence, but what then? What's then? What about the jobs and so on? And I think also for these kind of people, you know, whatever they did in the past, they did not really care about, for example, creating jobs and for doing other issues, you know, health system, as we spoke before. So I think that is the issues where European Union should also help Kosovo, besides, of course, the other issue of the dialogue with Serbia, also necessary, but it's not the only issue. My first acquaintance with Kurti, by the way, was when I went through the streets many years ago of Pristina and saw some slogans on the wall written in favor of Kurti. And the slogans were not very friendly, of course, to the Serb-Kosovo dialogue. But when I met Kurti, I noticed that he at least has an orientation on the issues he wants to solve for the people. He avoids the issue because it's not so a popular one for his voters. But now once he is again prime minister, I hope so, he will be voted for again as prime minister, he has to think about the interrelationship between the domestic issue and the discussion with Serbia, and of course with the Serb population inside his country, especially if a separation of the northern Mitrovica area is off the table. And if you want to keep Kosovo as a one, of course also Serbia, then you have to deal with this issue. You won't get many investments into the country if there's always the danger of a conflict. You won't have the freedom or the easiness to solve domestic issues if there are always a danger of the EU will not do anything with Serbia. And including also what, Stephanie, you mentioned, the 5 countries who still have not recognized the independence of Kosovo, which I think is a mistake, but it's a fact. If there's an agreement with Serbia, it's much easier to win these countries over into supporting it and to recognize the independence of Kosovo. So I think, yes, it is important to look into the domestic issues, to give the younger people a future, to prevent too much of emigration. Sorry, because yes, there should be some emigration, but people should also come back with knowledge, with experience, with new ideas. And therefore, I think it is necessary that Kurti in some way, or his government and the president who will be elected, we will see who that will be, to have a strategy where they concentrate on domestic issues, but at the same time look to Europe, and that Europe can do something for them. And my last point, of course, now with Biden in Washington, it's much easier that Europe and the US have a common or similar or parallel strategy for the whole region. And again, it is not one only on foreign policy, it is to give the leaders the task to think about economic and social development at home, and not play the game of going with the US against Europe or the other way around.
Yeah. Thank you, Hannes. DONIKA, of course, I'm also interested in how you see this. How does Kosovo approach European Union and also the US? It was mentioned that now with Biden it might be easier. We even remember that Trump also tried. I mean, it was perceived differently, but with this special envoy Grenell, then they also wanted to somehow reactivate the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. And as I mentioned before, Albin Kurti does not really seem to have a big focus on that. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on how do people in Kosovo see this problem? We also remember there was this idea, I think 2 years ago, about this land swap, between the north of Kosovo and then the south in Serbia. Like, how would you say are these issues now approached from a point of view from within Kosovo?
Yeah, I mean, Kurti hasn't been that vocal when it comes to the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. And in the previous elections, they were, in a way, because the circumstances were different, as Trump was still in power. And of course, Grenell was very proactive in the region, and Thaci was still in Kosovo. There was a lot of pressure towards Kurti, but even Osmani being sort of the sponsor of this coalition between LDK and Vedvendosje, we only knew what Kurti and Osmani do not want, which was the exchange of territories, something that was widely supported also by the public opinion here in Kosovo, even among the Serbs, but also had a lot of support from the EU countries, especially Germany. And then, of course, there was a hesitation to accept the agreement on the Association of Serbian Majority Municipalities in Kosovo, which is, again, an issue that is on hold, an agreement that has been signed between Kosovo and Serbia and then rejected to some extent by the Constitutional Court in Kosovo, going against the multi-ethnic spirit of the country, of course. And then, but we never heard of the options that they would opt for, or the third option that they would actually come up with. And then, of course, the events with Kurti being overthrown and then the DC agreement somehow closed this chapter of the US let's say, pressure towards Kosovo and Serbia to sign the deal. And then, of course, Biden coming to power is again a very welcome event, not just by here in Kosovo, but also among the EU. So with now Kurti would, of course, have it easier because there is clearly an alignment between, and as we expect, between the US and the EU in regards to the Kosovo-Serbia issue, but also in general in the region. Yes, it's harder for Kurti to say no, because it was very easy to say no to Trump. He had the support. Trump was unconventional in a way, and he was supported in his resistance to sign a deal that has been already prepared in a way by Thaci, Vučić, and Grenell. But this time with Biden saying no would be a lot harder because we are talking about a leader, a U.S. president who has been very present in the region, knows the region quite well, has been prioritizing the region in his call with Chancellor Merkel. And of course, it says a lot about the pressure that Kurti, if he becomes the prime minister of the country, will face with the international community. As far as the internal opinion towards the dialogue, let's be honest, dialogue was never a priority. It was never a priority. Back in 2011, there were backlashes. I mean, in Kosovo, the idea was rejected completely because if you ask the citizens, of course, the deal, the issue with Serbia has been closed in 2008 when we declared independence. But then, of course, reality on the ground is different. And we are already part of a process which is irreversible. And the events in the past 10 years in the process have somehow made Kosovo dependent. I mean, the existence of Kosovo internationally dependent on the events and the outcome of the dialogue. Kurti avoiding this topic first, but also kind of rejecting the idea, saying that it's not a priority, is, in Kosovo has been interpreted as creating a negotiation position. In my opinion, Kurti needs time. And the new government of Kosovo needs a lot of time to prepare for the dialogue, to create a common position, to create this internal unity when it comes to the dialogue. I mean, if you look at how the events have been unfolding in the past years in relation to Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, it was rarely because we had different positions with Serbia. It was mostly because of the fact that our president and prime ministers couldn't agree on what do they want from the process. So if you look at the Haradinaj-Thaci relations, but also then Kurti-Thaci relations, it was always the internal conflict on how to approach, on how to deal with Serbia rather than dealing with Vučić, because, we didn't even have the time to deal with Vučić because we had this internal frictions in relation to the dialogue. So Kurti needs a lot of time when it comes to the dialogue, but not as much as, he thinks he has by claiming that we will set the country straight and then we'll go to the process, back to the process, because setting the country straight takes decades probably. It has been a state capture since in the past 20 years cannot be dismantled within a short time span. So what Kurti is now interpreted to be doing is creating negotiation positioning with the international community, but also with Vučić. First, telling Vučić that, my existence does not depend on you. I will focus internally. Then what happens in relation to Serbia is not my problem, which was his approach back in 2019. And it was the dialogue that actually brought him down, which is, considered as a wrong approach. And also creating negotiation positioning with the international community, sort of sending messages that, in order to have a dialogue that is sustainable, that is based on principles and values, you need legitimate parties. And in Kosovo, we have already started this movement of changing political elite. But in Serbia, this, apparently is not going to happen anytime soon. So kind of sending the message that rule of law first, consolidated democracies first, decoupling the reforming process and the integration process from the dialogue is important. So then we can have healthy processes on both sides. And for the electorate, it's clear. Kurti wants to prepare the electorate that if he excludes himself or Kosovo from the process, he will have the support of the majority. And this will definitely create a new atmosphere in Kosovo, not just internally, but also towards our strategic partners who are pushing harder for this issue to be closed as soon as possible in order for the countries to move forward. So this is, I think, also a risky political move, but you can literally tell that he has made a difference already. I personally am pushing quite a lot to deconstruct what he has in mind when it comes to the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. I've been asking the same question over and over again. If you oppose two existing options which have been on the table so far, what's the third option? What does Kosovo want from the process? If recognition, then how do we achieve that? They have been avoiding to answer this question, and even the general public has been kind of critical towards me, like, would you ever stop talking about the dialogue? So I can tell that people are kind of aligning and creating this perception that it's not our priority and pushing for it. It's already kind of what you're pushing the country towards an agenda that is not urgent and that is not needed. Well, it remains to be seen, because I mean the letter sent from Biden to Vučić mentions explicitly the dialogue and the need to sign the deal and normalization and mutual recognition. The same letter would definitely come, and it came actually to Osmani just yesterday, again mentioning the normalization and the importance of dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. And it will come to Kurti when he comes to power. So it is better for him to actually start creating negotiation position in negotiating tables in cooperation with our strategic partners, instead of doing it in public and with the citizens. If you have the citizens, that is never going to be a priority. Priority is jobs, priority is prosperity, priority is making this country livable. So detaching internal politics and external politics is important. What we have been, in a way, hoping is that this tandem, this cooperation between Osmani and Kurti would be perfect, because Kurti would be dealing internally with the issues he always pushed for, democratization, rule of law, and dismantling state capture. And Osmani would be sort of a person who, as the president of the country, would not only be very much acceptable on the EU, but also US levels, but also would be a perfect fit for to run foreign policy for Kosovo, given her experience in the past. Whether she would become the next president, it remains to be seen. Numbers are not in her favor, unfortunately, because a potential coalition between Vetvendosi and any other party would definitely put the president's position into negotiating tables among parties.
Thank you very much, Donika. Maybe we can stay a little bit at the region. So, what would you say? What do the elections mean, also from a regional point of view? I mean, we also know that Albin Kurti, he himself calls himself more a social democrat, but critics would call him more like a left nationalist. And now I also see already a question on that topic, that he gave an interview at Euronews where he was saying that he would actually, if there would be a referendum, so if it would be constitutional, that he would actually vote for unification with Albania. So bringing back this topic of the Great Albania. And we also know that Edi Rama once in a while always plays with this kind of idea. We already touched a little bit about on the situation with Serbia, which is of course different. But also, I mean, then there's the pandemic you mentioned. I mean, there's a health crisis, and North Macedonia, for example, is going to receive vaccines from Serbia, whereas I hear that Kosovo does not really want to get vaccines, which are mainly coming from Russia and China. And we all know that also Russia and China are blocking the self-determination status of Kosovo. So the regional question, but also the question on this nationalism, which is often also, I would say, valued towards Albin Kurti.
Oh, it's a very tricky question. I mean, we always wanted to think that Albin Kurti transformed over the time. I mean, Hani said that, back in the days, even, his approach towards the dialogue was very excluding, even hostile approach towards whatever that was happening and taking place in the framework of that process. But in the meantime, he sort of got softer. But this also, we hope, was the case in a way with the unification and great Greater Albania idea, because he's built his political identity using these two elements. I mean, opposing the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia and whatever was happening there. Of course, doing the opposition towards the old ruling elite when it comes to internal functioning. But then the second pillar was the unification with Albania, and it was, I believe, because this is always on the agenda, it's always out there, the idea, but it was the first one that actually put it in the party's agenda. But then it disappeared. At some point in the elections of 2017, it disappeared in the program. It was enhanced cooperation with Albania, but more internal dialogue with the local Serbs. So in a way, he changed the approach towards these processes. And now he never mentioned the unification with Albania in political programs. It's not there, not even during the debates. He did mention enhanced cooperation, which is very tricky because he and Rama personally do not have that good of relations, let's say. I mean, they have been clashing over mini Schengen, they have been clashing over many other issues. I mean, clearly Kurti is not Rama's favorite politician in Kosovo. He has been aligning with Thaci for a long period of time, that he has this problem accepting any other option but Thaci. I mean, if you look at his approach toward Haradinaj, it was the same. I mean, they almost ended up in the court. And then with Kurti was the friction that they had. In terms of regional approach, I mean, Kurti and this need for change and what happened in Kosovo has been highly praised in the region, but also beyond. So the first impact has been kind of felt in Albania. And this is because Albania is going through an electoral process. Albania does not have political alternatives, but three parties that have been capturing the state in the past, like in forever. But Vjosa has a branch in Albania, and they are supporting independent candidates, meaning that there is a possibility for Vjosa to become a political force in Albania too. So there has been a lot of resistance from Rama, but a lot of support from the general public. Maybe this is in a way creating a solid ground for what Kurti probably plans in the future. But if you look at his short-term objectives, it remains in the margins of setting the country straight, strengthening the rule of law in Kosovo, enhancing cooperation with Albania, and if after 5 years circumstances change, or the countries, I don't know, are consolidated enough and the circumstances change in international and regional arena, there will be a referendum asking people whether they want to join Albania or not. We're still not sure whether this is, him sending messages that he hasn't changed, that, he's, focusing on Kosovo, but his long-term goal is also unification with Albania or extending his presence in Albania. It's completely unpredictable at this point. We have been asking him, but also Ramush, because also Ramush Haradinaj had this unification with Albania card used in the elections. When we asked him to deconstruct it, he didn't go beyond the margins of bilateral cooperation, and which can also be seen, can take place in regional cooperation initiatives or within the EU. The other option or the other element that the politicians in Kosovo, including Kurti and Haradinaj, are not talking about is whether Albania wants to unify with Kosovo. I mean, because Albania is already part of NATO. I mean, Haradinaj even had this crazy idea of becoming a NATO member using Albania, as if, enlarging NATO borders, it's very simple thing to do. And then as if, NATO having the KFOR mission here, it does not make it, complex enough. So, in a way, they don't seem to have an idea. They don't seem to know whether Albania wants to join Kosovo. Clearly, Rama is, the potential winning candidate in the elections that are going to be held soon in Albania. And this relation that they have with Rama is not going to help this agenda at all. Also, Albania is entering the accession negotiations soon with the EU. And I don't think that, making a step back for Albania after struggling so hard to make it to this point would be a good alternative. So as I said, it's something that is up in the air. It's something that can be used to mobilize electorate, but also can be used as a card towards the international community because, well, guess what? We don't have Russia, we don't have China like Vučić has, and all we have is probably this wild card that we can use. But so far, I don't really seem that they have an idea on how to do it. But of course, it's worth keeping an eye on how the events will unfold once Kurti becomes the prime minister of the country and how Vjosa will develop in Albania. This is very important. As for the vaccines and the pandemic, honestly, I mean, Kurti has had this, kind of very complex attitude towards regional cooperation initiatives in general. Mini Schengen was strongly opposed. The rest are sort of okay-ish for him, but he doesn't seem to unfold as a lot of his plans when it comes to regional cooperation and foreign policy. As far as I'm concerned, even like people who are within Vjosa dealing with foreign policy are not the brightest people I've ever met. I clearly can tell that they don't understand the regional and international dynamics. As for the vaccines, I mean, and the cooperation with Serbia, Kurti accepted the 1,000 test kits. He was widely criticized, but he did so. As for the vaccines, there has been no discussion so far. The vaccines have been sort of sent to the northern part of Kosovo, and most probably Serbs living in the south can go register and take the vaccines there. But it hasn't, nothing has been revealed in terms of Serbia donating vaccines like they did to North Macedonia so far. And if Kurti does so, then of course the opposition now being LDK, PDK, and the rest, supposedly, he will receive a lot of backlash.
Thank you very much, Donika. At this point, I would like to encourage again our participants to ask questions, to pose questions if you have some. But Hannes, maybe you can also reflect upon a little bit on what Donika just said. I mean, we touched upon this land swap issue, we touched upon this Great Albania idea. I know you know Albania also quite well and also the whole region. So maybe you can reflect a little bit and touch upon what Donika just said.
Yeah, I fully agree with Donika. And I said, I would say to Kurti the same, I would say, and I said already to Mr. Dodik in the Republic Srpska, if you want to stop the way towards the European Union, not only for yourself, but for Albania in one case, or Serbia in the other case, then try to find a united country. I'm not, all this Great Albania, I'm not afraid at any time about Great Albania, but what does it mean? What does it mean for the Serb minority in Kosovo? They are even a smaller minority. You cannot say the Serb, the area of northern Mitrovica cannot go to Serbia, but we go to Albania. Or the same is true, of course, for what's happened with the Albanians in northern Macedonia. Maybe there comes a new movement. Also, we want also to go into the Greater Albania. I think these are crazy ideas. Not if you look to the fragility of the ethnic structures in the Balkans, it doesn't help anything. And if you fight for the sovereignty of your country, you cannot say on the one hand against Serbia, you cannot on the other side say, okay, let's join Albania. Maybe as Donika said, there's some other reason of, for some leaders, their own country is not big enough, so they want to have influence also in other countries. And this conflicts again and again with Albania, and also you have different lines between the socialists on the one hand and the Democrats in Albania. It doesn't help. I mean, what you should support is the country as such, and independent of who is a leader and who is just a prime minister. So I think this is the interest of the European Union, to keep the stability in that sense. That, as Donika mentioned in the beginning, she's studying on the stability. That means on the combination of EU being strongly for stability and not so strong for democracy, and accepting, let's say, some authoritarian structures. I think that is true. And here, I think the European Union should not only look into stability, but also fight against authoritarian structures. Mm-hmm. And here I fully agree also with DONIKA that the vote for Kurti and his party, I think, is primarily a vote against neglect of corruption or too much corruption, and of neglect of democratic development in the country. And therefore, I think insofar we should be very positive about what happened, because it was a change, a democratic change. It was a change away from, let's say, an undemocratic imposition of a new government with the support of the United States of Mr. Trump. So I think what is not regarded enough is the positive development we see now in the country. But unfortunately, with this kind of, sayings of let's go together with Albania, Kurti is destroying some of the image he has been winning in the past. And again, what has to be clear, Kurti must be the prime minister of all the people in Kosovo at the end of the day. As difficult as it is, he has Albanian population, he has Serb population, he has some other minorities. It is our, let's say, the level of development in Europe is that at least you try to be the president of all your citizens in your own country. You have deviation, unfortunately, but that must be the aim. And whoever will be president, the same should be for the president of the parliament. So Kosovo is really on the brink of going in the right direction with Mr. Kurti as prime minister, but maybe he needs some advisors like DONIKA and other people who could tell him, look, you have to take a bit care what is thought about you also outside the country and outside your closed circle.
Thank you very much, Hannes. DONIKA, if you want to react to that, or
I mean, this was also what we have. I mean, a very small critical mass has been saying in relation to changing the borders. I mean, how is it different from Thaci's idea? Of that even Kurti had opposed, has opposed in the past years. But also, is it clearly, saying that Kosovo is a failed state? Like the project that has been sort of pushed by the international community has been failing, and now the only option that we have, we cannot exist as such alone. We cannot thrive in international arena. So let's unify with Albania and seek other opportunities. So basically, it's working against the country, which is kind of hard to understand for some of us, which have been struggling. Not those during the war, which Hannes mentioned in the beginning, but even the efforts that we have been sort of investing in this country, in building a free, multi-ethnic and democratic country. So this is an idea, is definitely unnecessary at this point. I'm sure that it's very, even for me, like I will be perceived as very unpopular, like the most unpopular opinion probably, but it's definitely something we have to be cautious, and we have to invest in something that we have created and we have fought for, which was independence. And then, basically creating a country that is solid enough to build, to democratically transform internally, but also have bilateral and multilateral relations. I mean, 120 countries have recognized us for Kosovo, not for Kosovo with Albania or Kosovo with any other countries. And if you ask many of the countries, especially within the NATO, they would probably send Kosovo back to Serbia rather than give it to Albania instead. So, I mean, these are very dangerous waters. And, these are the things that we should really open at this point, given the multi-frontal crisis that we are having internally. So let's talk about prosperity, and let's not open chapters that would, again, engage us in stabilitocracy. Kurti has been sort of criticizing the stability approach of the EU and how they supported authoritarian regimes in the region. Then why become one? So let's think progressively at this point. But also, yes, this is this is a very good chance for the EU to change the approach, at least towards Kosovo. I agree with Hannes. We have been seen only through the lens of the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, and clearly Kurti wants to change this, which is good, because then detaching the reform agenda and dialogue with Serbia would definitely be helpful for the country to develop. So I do hope that the EU will, of course, invest in both. I do believe that, I really hope that Kurti will have a pragmatic and progressive approach and sit with the EU partners, but also with the US partners, and ask for time, ask for capacities. Also, if he personally he thinks that some other things should be prioritized instead, then of course, ask for more time until we create this position, but definitely not exclude this the option of the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, but work in parallel in both and have a progressive approach in both. As I said, it really depends on who he creates coalition with. There is a question from Team Judah on the coalition and the president, and the president's position is going to make Vedvendosje sort of have this, partnership internally, which I believe he should have. He's the prime minister of all. This is what he said, of all people, including those who voted for other parties, those who voted for, who are Serbs and other minorities. He did not have a very so far a very exclusive approach towards Lista Srpska. He's aware of the fact that they should be in the government, but himself, he is aware that also Lista Srpska is highly sort of controlled by Vučić. So he wants to create a government that does not depend on the votes of Lista Srpska, so then they cannot blackmail the government of Kosovo internally, but create one with other minorities, but also Lista Srpska in there, of course, as it is stated in the constitution, and Kurti has been praised for even approaching them in Cyrillic in 2019, but also working with Serbs who are progressive outside of Lista Srpska, like Nenad Rašić. So in a way, he had the proactive approach towards the Serbian community so far. But then it remains to be seen, because what I forgot to mention, if you look at the dynamics on how the Lista Srpska is strengthening politically while we were busy fighting each other, it's rather concerning, because according to our constitution, we have 10 reserve seats for Lista Srpska, for Serbs, sorry, not Lista Srpska, and then 10 others for other minorities, other communities living in Kosovo. What Lista Srpska is doing is expanding. So now instead of 10 from Lista Srpska, we will have 13 or 14 members in the parliament, meaning that their political power within the parliament is strengthening. They are including Bosniaks. They are fishing for other communities, and soon they might probably even have 20 seats in the parliament, which then for Kurti is hard, especially now, to create a government without Lista Srpska, because he will probably have only 7 members instead of 10. And these numbers are really important, especially now that, he really needs them for the position of the president and, of course, to form the government. As I said, it's not only the challenges that we know, but also the challenges that of how he navigates with political opponents, including Lista Srpska in Kosovo.
Thank you, Donika. I think we already touched upon many questions in the chat, but there's another one. Where Ferenc Nimit asks, how can relations with Tirana change with the participation of LVV's Albanian branch in the upcoming Albanian elections? Can you see the expansion or cooperation with some parties on a strategic level of LVV to North Macedonia or to the Presevo Valley?
Well, I will start with Albania, because I talked about this issue before. If you look at the general support for Kurti in Albania, is tremendous. Of course, Osmani is supported as well. During her visit, I think a month ago, she was praised as this young generation of politicians, sort of also supported by the general public. But Kurti is the I think the main sort of political thing that is being discussed in Albania right now. I mean, I get messages from Albania stating that you are lucky to have options like Kurti to vote for. I mean, this is the level of support that they have for Kurti, and it really showcases the need that they have to change things internally. I mean, in Albania, a voter does not have a lot of alternatives. I mean, you can either go from party 1 to party B, but things rarely change. It just depends on who gets to capture the state. So feeling this need for change, I believe that Kurti now will and is also using this created environment to actually thrive politically in there. As I said, he already is supporting some of the independent candidates. He's already challenging the Rama's position. I see a lot of tendency of him to support to cooperate with the Democratic Party, and he recently even met with Salih Berisha, which is sort of I guess it's less of because of cooperation with the Democratic Party and more of opposition towards Edi Rama on individual level again. So yes, I mean, I see a lot of cooperation with political parties, even probably civil society, and of course the social movement that is there already of Vjosa and that is strengthening. As for the North Macedonia, he has already endorsed the political candidate. There is not Ali Ahmeti. There is not part of Ali Ahmeti's party, the Progressive. I mean, they didn't make. They were as politically to this extent. They're not as powerful as Ali Ahmeti, but Kurti has been sort of creating this solid cooperation with him. He came to Kosovo as well and endorsed Kurti before the election, so you can see an enhanced partnership. In a way, Kurti is creating these progressive political parties that are challenging the existing political elites, which are widely perceived as corrupt. When it comes to Preševo, to this extent, I mean, Kurti is not that he has been quite vocal in that regard. He has been quite careful, especially when it comes to the territorial exchange, because for Kurti was a very weird positioning, because as a person who wants to unify Albanians, kind of rejecting the idea of some Albanians joining Kosovo was already a bit tricky for him when he opposed the territorial exchange. So far, we haven't seen enhanced cooperation with politicians there. Of course, they praise Shaib Kamberi for having the political courage to even hold speeches in Albanian against Vučić, and as the only opposition in the parliament in Serbia right now. I think in this regard, Gent Sakaj, the former Albanian Minister of Foreign Affairs, played a huge role. He even invested a lot of political efforts to actually unify the Albanians in the Albanian political parties in Preševo. Then, of course, it was successful, but he's not part of Vjosa. He's, being known as being very close to PDK. So for Kurti in Preševo Valley is still unknown, and is probably, if there is a plan, it's in its infancy.
Thank you very much, Donika. There's another question in the chat. I think we already touched upon it quite vividly, but the question is actually, is a compromise with Serbia possible under Albin Kurti?
Well, that we don't know. I mean, if you look at how the international community is approaching Kurti, even Viola von Kramon, who is, widely criticized for being too pro-Kosovo in the parliament. She has been pushing forward a lot of changes internally, but also rooting for Kosovo in the visa liberalization process and all. She stated that there is going to be a compromise. And I think that compromise, Kurti is not well known as a politician who makes compromises. And this is probably comes to the element that I mentioned before, that is probably preparing the general, public in Kosovo that if he sort of leaves the process, to have the support at least internally. It remains to be seen, as I said, because I mean Kurti supported Biden, but then Biden supported the associations, which was opposed by Kurti. Biden supported the demarcation with Montenegro, which wasn't voted by Kurti. So let's see how this EU-US cooperation will go, and how much of a pressure will be towards Kurti to go back to the process. And then we will probably gather again and discuss about this in a larger panel, which can be regional, and discuss the dynamics after Kurti comes to power.
Thank you very much, DONIKA. I mean, we're already talking for an hour, but I would have like one last question, and I think we should touch upon it because today is the Independence Day of Kosovo, and I think it is we should also talk about it, like what path did Kosovo go, like from 2008 until today. So maybe you can reflect a little bit on that. And then also, I mean, what role does civil society play there and played in those years? Because we know that especially in Kosovo, civil society is quite vivid. It's not everywhere in the region the same. So maybe you can try to reflect a little bit on this. And then Hannes, I would also, of course, like you to ask, like, how do you see the evolution of Kosovo since 2008 for now, and where will it go in the future? And that is my last question. Yes, DONIKA, go ahead, please. Or maybe you start.
Maybe that DONIKA has the last word as our guest. Briefly, two remarks. The one on the thing DONIKA mentioned on Kurti and in the region, especially in Albania and North Macedonia. I think if Kurti is some idol, is some symbol also for change and bring younger people to the political field, it's very good. I fear if he is going too much into internal domestic issues, he would lose again that, because then he would be part of a political, game. I fully agree. Albania needs some new politicians and structures. The Albanian community in North Macedonia needs some new elements and younger elements. And so this would be a good influence of Kurti. But meeting, for example, Mr. Berisha in Albania is not giving the signal of renewal and renovation. So this is one element. It may be even, have a backlash that forces inside the region, also in the EU, will say, well, if he's making some turmoil and a nuisance in the neighborhood, it would not be very good. So yes, the image should be here, and Kurti should have that influence, but I think he should not go too much into the details. On the other issues, I think, again, Kosovo, and to your last question, Kosovo had made very important steps forward, especially on some of the legislation. But I think this is the big chance of Kurti. He can be the one who brings Kosovo in a new age, so to say. Again, as I said in the beginning, the past is never past. What happened will always be again and again on the issue in discussions in Kosovo itself and between Serbia and Kosovo. But if he combines a strong domestic policy, but with invitation also to the outside world to come into Kosovo, to invest in the Kosovo, to create new jobs, younger people coming back, at the same time, trying to come to a dialogue with Serbia. For example, to make it very concrete, I also would say this kind of federation of Serb communities is splitting the country. We should fight together, European Union, US, and also the responsible politicians of the region and the NGOs, as DONIKA and these young people, to stop that the ethnic division is the dominant characteristic of people. No, it's not dominant if you are Serb or if you are Albanian. The dominant must be if you do something in your country to develop the country, to help to develop it. So let's fight against this kind of domination of ethnic divisions, go to other issues. I think that's the future. And here Kurti has a big chance to do something if he's not just rallying the Albanian community, but including all the people in the country. and has a reasonable attitude also towards the European Union. The Union is eager to help, but he must respond to the Union. And I think Macek also is a reasonable guy, even if he comes from a country which did not recognize Kosovo. I think himself, he would be happy to help Kurti to overcome some of the impediments of the development towards the European Union.
Thank you, Hannes. Very important points, I would say. Yeah, DONIKA, maybe if you would like to add to that, but then also a little bit on what happened since 2008 and also the question about civil society. That would be my last question. So
I will start from my favorite one, the civil society, because I mean, I mentioned in the beginning, and it was intentional, the fact that Kurti started from a grassroots social movement and made it to the top. And made it to the top because civil society, media, and critical mass existed in Kosovo. We can criticize Kosovo as much as we want, but if you look at the regional perspective of the regional picture, civil society in Kosovo is very vibrant, super critical in Kosovo. I mean, there have been so many isolated cases, but I criticized the establishment for so long, and I'm still here, and I'm still I've been encouraged to do so so far. And there are tendencies. There is a perception that Kurti will start killing the critical mass because of the support he has, but also the authoritarian tendencies. That is remain to be seen. But the key message that we send to Kurti, but also whoever comes to power, is that civil society is powerful in Kosovo, and we won't allow that critical space and critical mass to diminish, and we will safeguard it. The role of civil society in Kosovo has been crucial. I mean, I'm not just saying in the state building process, but also when it comes to sort of helping the country develop internally. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has been shrinking civil society and civic space in all of the countries, but in Kosovo it was the other way around. Civil society served as a bridge between institutions and the citizens, and in a way turned towards citizens and not towards institutions, because I mean, being built in a very crucial period of the state building process. All civil society was built in Pristina and was investing in sort of helping the country develop. But during the pandemic, they in a way turned towards towards citizens and towards their own the role of creating constituencies and linking to the citizens, which was amazing to see. I mean, I lead an NGO of which gathers 270 organizations, and all I had to report during the pandemic was how civil society is helping people and how civil society is being the voice of the people towards in times of pandemic. So yes, it was civil society, something that not just in Kosovo, but also in other regional countries should be a priority for the EU in order, if they want to have a very healthy transformation of the region into democracies. And it's sad to see what is happening in Serbia and how a vibrant civil society is now struggling to make its own space. When it comes to 2008 Kosovo, it's a very, very difficult question. I mean, we had a lot of expectations, as Hannes said. There was a perception that after we declare independence, everything would be set straight immediately, and we will be thriving internationally, but also internally. And then, of course, we had a lot of challenges that were internal in terms of consolidating democracy, and externally, of course, gaining recognition and becoming part of multilateral cooperation mechanisms, which hasn't been going that well for Kosovo. If you look at the general picture, of course, a lot of good things have been happening in Kosovo, but not as much as we wanted, and there is a huge discrepancy between the investment that has been made and the results that are out there and the impact that is out there. And of course, there is a lot of room for criticism. That's why I even said in the beginning, this time we are celebrating anniversary different, because last year we kind of, and the year before, we kind of lost the will to celebrate. It lost its meaning because of the challenges that we were facing internally, but also also how, you know, countries facing with derecognition campaign from Serbia. We are not sure even whether on how many countries recognize Kosovo, because this is very uncertain process in which is not very, very transparent. And on the other hand, we haven't been very much successful in becoming part of UNESCO and Interpol, and of course EU and UN, which have been sort of, and NATO, which are a more distant objective of the country. So that's why I'm saying this year we have reason to celebrate, because changes have been, you know, are starting, and this is a good message for all citizens of Kosovo. I even forgot to mention the fact the diaspora voted massively, and if you interview them, they all have the hope to come back. Brain gain. This is very important. They are all investing a lot. I mean, it was cold. It's a pandemic, and it was. I mean, the Central Election Commission did the impossible to actually prevent them from voting, because obviously they are pro-change and pro-dossier. Again, against all odds, they came to Kosovo, invested a lot of money, put their health into risk to come and vote for change, hoping that one day Kosovo would be as good as, you know, the EU countries that they live in, so they can come back with their kids and live in their home country. So there is a hope that things will turn around, and that's a huge political weight for Kurti, who has the support of 50% of the voters, to actually move the country forward and lead the country forward, set agendas, and in cooperation with the citizens, and make also decisions that are not that popular for the citizens, but the leaders have to do it. You know, that's why they have the responsibility and the endorsement. So yes, we have been struggling between challenges, political crisis, but, you know, crisis kept Rome alive, you know. In a way, crisis kept Kosovo still independent, in a way, internally, and made the change possible. So let's hope that we will vote after 4 years, not after 2, not after 1 year, or not after 4 months first, and then let's hope that we will be able to focus on substance, political reforms, rather than political crisis and egos of political leaders here in Kosovo. Challenges are ahead, and they're going to start not with Kurti consolidating the government as people perceive, or the numbers to get into the president elected, but after all of this is solved, because then we will have to deliver on many issues that we are looking forward to.
Thank you very much, Donika, for this very comprehensive analysis. Thank you, Hannes. I think you made it quite clear there are so many challenges Kosovo was facing and is still facing. It will not happen overnight to overcome all those challenges. We mentioned brain drain, you mentioned civil society, you mentioned corruption, you mentioned jobs and justice system. But nevertheless, the chance is there for Kurti to bring some change. That is also what people are demanding. So let me thank you again, and let's hope for a good future for Kosovo in the years to come. And I'm pretty sure that we will meet again, hopefully in person, to discuss it even more, to bring it again to the attention to the European Union countries, but also within the region. So thanks again, and have a nice day, and enjoy. Thank you. Goodbye.
It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.